Actual Fluency Podcast, episode 34 with Conor Clyne.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello guys, and welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast. I'm bringing you another episode. This is episode 34, and I'm happy once again to be here with you on this very fine day. Today we're talking to the Language Tsar, Conor Clyne, who, like another Irish polyglot, or perhaps the Irish polyglot, Benny Lewis, left high school with speaking no languages, well, English, of course, and then now, some years later, he speaks over 10 languages and moving on to rapidly approaching 12 and 13. And Conor and I talk a lot about traveling, learning languages, what's his favorite methods and kind of techniques to learn languages have been, and the experiences he's acquired learning all these languages over the years. So that's super exciting. But before we get into today's show, I just want to say thank you guys for listening to the show, but also for those people who sent me messages and emails thanking me for the show. It really means a lot to me. Some people actually took the time to write reviews on iTunes, and I'm so kind of grateful for that I'm actually going to read them here. And I just want to say thank you. And if you want to leave a review on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it. It's actualfluency.com/iTunes will direct you to the iTunes page. And you do need to have a kind of an iTunes user to do it. So that's why I'm extra thankful for these people taking extra time out of their day to leave a review. But Will of the North says, the podcast is amazing overall. Chris, the host, brings tons of great guests. He has interesting leading questions and brings tons of great language learning tips too. Highly recommend it to all language learners, and be sure to look through the episode list for a nice tour of famous polyglots, because Chris has interviewed almost all of them. Thank you so much, Will of the North. And you're totally right about the list. This is 34th episode. So if you're kind of new to the podcast, you can go back through the list and you'll probably find some familiar names. And if you didn't, I still recommend you to go back and listen to them, because, they have a lot of great stuff to bring. You don't need to be Benny Lewis to have great wisdom about language learning. So definitely go back and listen to that. And Dato Green says, Actual Fluency is a great podcast for language learners from any background. Chris Broholm loves language learning and dedicates himself to hearing the stories of learners from all kinds of backgrounds. There's always something interesting, and I love his enthusiasm as a host. Dato, I'm so happy about that. You definitely made my day. And those two reviews were 2 5-star reviews from iTunes. And I'm so happy about these reviews that I'm actually gonna give 2 italki vouchers to these people. So Will of the North and Dato Green, if you send me your email address via the contact page on Actual Fluency, I'll send you a free voucher for a free language learning lesson on italki. And of course, that's provided by italki. So if you are looking for a place to find a tutor, professional, or just an informal tutor, I recommend that you go to italki.com. That's italki.com. Thank you so much. And me and Conor had so much fun and so much to talk about that I had to split this episode into 2 parts. So this week you're going to hear part 1, episode 34. And then next Friday you're going to hear the next part, which is part 35. So I hope you enjoy this interview with the Language Tsar. Today's guest, Conor Clyne, is the founder of the popular language learning blog LanguageTsar.com, and since he's left school, has learned over 10 languages independently. Conor, thank you so much for coming on to the show, and how are things today?
Great, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I'm in good form. How are things?
Really good. It couldn't be better, in fact. And I briefly introduced you, but I was wondering if you'd take a few minutes to just give the extended version, what happened after you left high school in terms of language learning.
Great. So I have a pretty similar story to a fellow countryman who's also involved in the language learning YouTube community, and that's Benny Lewis. Benny and I were born in the same country, and neither of us were successful at all in learning languages at school. Neither of us spoke anything other than English by the time we left. And later on, I moved. I took the opportunity to go on Erasmus when I was at university. I was studying law, and then I had the chance to go to France. And I couldn't even say anything. Basically, when I arrived the first day, I had to point and grunt when I wanted a sandwich. I was that desperate. And so I had a very difficult experience in the beginning. Of course, when I arrived, I couldn't communicate with anybody for several months, basically. But eventually I started to overcome these initial difficulties. And having gotten my French to a reasonably good level, I discovered actually Michel Thomas when I got back to do my final year. And in between preparing for my exams, I started to learn a little bit of Italian and Spanish. I was quite inspired and very motivated by the simple course and the initial progress I was able to make after listening to his recordings. But the reason I was actually attracted to them in the beginning was because the back of the box said no drills, no homework, and no memorization. Mm-hmm. So for me, that sounded perfect because throughout my entire school days, I've been forced to try and memorize things and reciting things and doing lots of homework, and none of it seemed to be particularly effective for me. Later on, I got the opportunity to study in a few different countries as part of my extended university studies. So I also started learning languages like Dutch because I lived in the Netherlands, and Italian. I got a good opportunity to improve that to fluency. Because I also lived in Italy for a year. I got to study there. And then later on, I moved to the US, and I had the good fortune to live actually right beside a Latin American neighborhood in Washington, D.C. So there I got the opportunity to speak in Spanish every day, and also to travel a little bit around Latin America. So I went to Brazil, so I was exposed to Portuguese for the first time, and everything kind of snowballed from initially not having any success at all learning languages and being quite turned off by the whole experience at school. Then later on, I came back after my university. I returned to Europe, and I started working in Brussels, which because the European Union's institutions are based there. There were people from all over Europe and of course around the world, but in particular from the different member states. And I got the opportunity to practice all the languages I have been learning quite regularly amongst the friends I made. And also I was exposed to new ones. And that also inspired me to travel an awful lot within Europe. I really wanted to go. In the beginning, I just wanted to go to every single member state because I had friends and colleagues from each of them or most of them, and I thought it would be great to at least go once to each of their countries. And once I guess I had gone to all the member states, which are 28 today, I decided, well, why not finish off and kind of see every country that I can within Europe at least, and then we'll see afterwards. But not in a way that I thought I wanted to tick off a list. I don't say, okay, I got to go and see them all just once, and then very superficially just visit for a day or something. I whenever I have the opportunity, I try to see something new. That could be also a new region within Europe primarily, or somewhere else in the world, and to try and eventually I will get through all of them, I guess, if I live long enough. So that's kind of my background. And then with respect to the blog, I think I have and the YouTube channel, I have a similar motivation as I believe you do, which is that I also was very impressed by the videos that I saw from other polyglots and language enthusiasts on YouTube in the last 4 or 5 years. People like Richard Simcott and Luca Lampariello and Benny Lewis, and there are so many out there, yeah. Steve Kaufman. And I wanted to do something to contribute to this community, because I gotten so much out of their videos and their blogs and the information that they were providing free for people who are interested in learning languages. And the genesis began when I went to the first polyglot conference in Budapest in 2013. And there I actually got to meet so many of these great polyglots in person at the conference, and then after the conference, I decided, well, I will start doing my own website and YouTube channel. So that's kind of, where gets us to today, in terms of language learning.
That's a very good overview. And I just want to say a really good job on the YouTube videos. Often in this community, there's a bit of a problem with it's often just talking heads videos, but I like that you put in a lot of, production value into the having lots of languages and, the nice little graphics and stuff. So I just wanted to say good job on that.
Thanks. I'm glad that you find that element interesting. That's actually one of the things I want to do with the channel is to have as many languages in the videos and on the website as possible, and to provide valuable and entertaining content for people who are interested in learning languages or just interested in languages in general, in the various languages, not just to have everything say in a lingua franca like English. People can read the subtitles. So I try to make it to keep it as multilingual as possible.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. If you look at someone like Moses McCormick, for instance, I can't understand probably 99% of the languages that he does in his videos, but with the subtitles, I'm actually able to watch and enjoy them. So, that's exactly all it takes, really. But I want to go back to the kind of, I guess, the turning point. You said you moved to France, you couldn't speak a word French, and then you found Michel Thomas, and it sounded as though this kind of opened your world, to so to say. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had gotten my French to a reasonably good level after spending 1 year in France. I also worked for the summer there. I worked in Nice, in the south of France, and I have been exposed quite a lot to Italian. I'd gone traveling around Italy for a couple of weeks. I'm really in love with Italy after my trip there. And I remember sitting on the plane just before I flew back to Ireland, where I had to finish my final year of undergraduate studies, that I promised myself that I would come and I would live for 1 year in Italy sometime. So then when I got back, I thought, well, the first thing I'm going to have to do now that I speak French is that I've got to start learning Italian if I really want to go there at some stage and live. And that's when I went to my local bookstore and I found Michel Thomas. And it changed the way that I approach languages. It was something I guess I've been looking for because I had such an unsuccessful experience with learning languages in school and this kind of traditional learn grammar rules, learn right. Vocabulary, rote, and then regurgitate it. And this had been, of course, complete failure for me as a method. So the fact that this was proposed an alternative really got me super interested in it. And then after I did the Italian, I also started, he didn't have so many languages available. I think Spanish was the next one I looked at. And then I also took his German. Basically, I consumed as many of them as I could at the time. And it's only later that I was able to make use of them a couple of years later when I learned Spanish and German. So definitely was a turning point. I also then went and I lived in the Netherlands and Italy I actually got to live in Italy just 2 years later. So already that goal had been achieved. So you got to change and have new ambitions for yourself after that. But that one I actually got to do very quickly. And it was definitely, I think, for me, it was the best year I'd had up to that point, really, my 1 year in Italy. So it was definitely worth investing the time in having started learning Italian. And it was definitely a realization of a personal goal for me, a dream, really. So that didn't disappoint at all. Awesome. And then that was just, I guess, as you say, a turning point. And then things continued. And afterwards, I had a great exposure to Spanish in Washington, D.C. when I lived there. And also I started learning some Russian. I had a semester at university. The reason I chose Russian is that I was interested in the former Soviet Union as I was studying international relations in Washington, D.C. And that was a region of the world that particularly interested me. So I wanted to at least start learning the language with no pressure to reach a certain level. Right. It was only later that I've now started to focus on it seriously and trying to get it as fluent as possible.
Did you learn the language? Did you decide to learn the languages before you decided to go to the place, or was learning the languages a consequence of you wanting to go to a place?
It's been both. I had been to Italy, which inspired me to learn Italian. I lived, as I said, in Washington, D.C. beside a Spanish-speaking district. So there I was exposed to the language and then wanted to go and learn it because I had an experience. I had a personal experience with the language. Other language like Russian, I'd never visited a Russian-speaking country when I took the semester, and I studied the region. It was only quite a couple of years later that I traveled to Russia for the first time. So there was the other way around. And then I had a Brazilian friend, for example, when I was in university in Italy and in America, and he invited me to spend New Year's Eve in Rio de Janeiro. And so I went there. And of course, if you go, especially for New Year's Eve to Rio, then I was completely enamored of the country. So I really wanted to try and learn Portuguese afterwards. It was really cool. So those kind of personal, I guess, intimate experiences you have with relationships with people, traveling to the country, really inspired me to want to learn the languages, because they're also an element of the culture of the place, of the people,
right?
And not just for communication, but also just to understand the culture more and to be more involved in it, to be more integrated when I travel or live in a different country.
Right. So I mean, today, when you look at the polyglot community, and obviously this is kind of a new movement in the last few years, but there are a lot of aspiring polyglots such as myself, and we have this ambition of, I want to speak 12 languages or something, or whatever the number might be. But in your situation, it's a while ago. So what you did was you sort of went learning this language, and then you sort of ran into another inspiration or a friend or a culture or something, and then you decided to learn another one. That's correct?
That's exactly the way it is. And when I moved back to Europe, I had a lot of colleagues who spoke German, for example. And because I was socializing with them, I wanted to really speak German, right? Because of course we could communicate in other languages, but when you have friends that are using it, especially if you're in your group and they all speak that as their first language, it's better if I can also converse in the same languages with them. So it was never an ambition to be a polyglot per se. I wasn't, when I was monolingual, I wasn't sitting there thinking I really want to speak 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 languages. This wasn't the mindset I had. I really got a lot out of having learned French and Italian and then Spanish in the beginning. And I remember when I was on my master program, we used to have to pass a proficiency test in a minimum of one language. And I had taken French and passed that test. And then I took Italian, and even though it wasn't obligatory, and taken it. And then I was like, well, I can also try Spanish. Actually, I didn't get through the Spanish, but there was one other guy who had lived in different parts of Africa, was on the course, and he also did the same thing. And there was just the fact that we spoke 3 or 4 different languages at that point. But things kind of morphed from that when I came back to Europe, and I was exposed to more and more languages. And it's because it becomes so integrated into my daily life through the relationships I have with friends, with colleagues, and where I travel to, especially in Europe, because it's so linguistically diverse in a very small geographical area, that you end up learning more and more as you get older, and you get inspired by new experiences to want to learn different languages. So at this stage, I guess at some stage I've started learning maybe 12 or 13 languages, and so we'll see how many I end up learning overall in the future. I've also let languages go or put them on hold. Because I had an original motivation to learn it, and then that motivation just disappeared. It wasn't there anymore, and I was more interested in a different language. So that happened with Chinese and with Arabic. So for the moment, I haven't tried to learn those languages for the last 5 years. But there was a time where I spent a couple of months on both of them, and I traveled to parts of the Middle East to use them, and I also had a Chinese trainee at my law firm when I was working in Brussels, and so we used to chat every morning a little bit, and I would write messages in Mandarin, but the traineeship was only 3 months, so after that I didn't have the same motivation to keep going, so that was that. I haven't tried to learn any since.
All right. One thing I was thinking about is that, obviously during your language learning here, you've had times where you were kind of in the same place for, let's say, a year. But also what I've noticed is that you seem to travel a lot and learn at the same time. And I think that would be interested to maybe talk a little bit about, because how do you actually maintain a language learning routine whilst on the road, so to speak? Because a routine is important, right? I mean, I would say so anyway.
Well, you just got to adapt your routine. For me, I've always taken the opportunity, especially in the last, we'll say, 7-8 years, to travel at every opportunity. I lived in Brussels for quite a number of years, and most weekends I traveled somewhere else simply because it was very easy and relatively cheap place to travel from. There are a huge number of flights to big airports, and the trains are pretty good, so you can travel every weekend if you want to afford it. Yeah. It's not such a big problem. So I've always had that kind of lifestyle in the last 7 or 8 years that I am traveling at least 3 or 4 times a month. And when you're traveling, okay, you might be in the country and you might be, you might speak the language. So there you're going to practice it anyways, because you're going to be walking around, talking to people, reading stuff in the language. And I find that if you take, for example, you're on a plane or you're on a train, you always have time to read something. I mean, you don't need to spend, 5 hours a day learning languages. That would never be my style. I think if you spend half an hour, that's more than enough to make good progress if it's consistent. So everybody can find half an hour when they're traveling, because there's a lot of downtime. You might be sitting around waiting for check-in or whatever, or to board a plane, and then you just have something handy. I think it's just about making it convenient. I mean, I always wake up in the morning and I usually watch the news headlines in my on my iPad, and you can just choose the country and the language. It's just about being prepared and having that. I don't think necessarily moving makes it that much more difficult. I mean, the only problem is internet connection. If you need to speak to someone, like have a class, that can be a little bit stressful if you don't have, don't have good Wi-Fi connection. And unfortunately, technology has not gotten us that far where with a smartphone, that if you're roaming, then it's that practical to set up a class, because the connectivity isn't super in most countries still. But I think within a few years that will even be possible, and then,
of course,
yeah, it won't be a big deal at all. If you're traveling to maintain all this different language routine.
Maybe it's a bit of a mindset too. Like I'm traveling, I'm in a foreign country. I want to be out and see the world. Then maybe the thought of opening your Teach Yourself or whatever you have lying or you brought with you, maybe that's a mindset thing. We just need to jump quickly past that and go, you know what, I'll spend my half hour or 45 minutes, whatever it takes every day to progress just a little bit.
Exactly. I think it's just approaching it with the mindset that you're going to also spend a little bit of time making sure that you keep up on whatever language you're learning, especially if you go to a country and it's not the spoken language. For example, you go to Germany and I don't know, you're learning French, then yeah, maybe if you just watch the news in the morning for 15 minutes and then read a little bit, like the news headlines.
Right.
You read one or two articles. I mean, it's only 15 minutes. Everybody has that time. I'm a great believer that everybody has the time to learn language. Just they have to know how to use the time and have the right mentality, right, proper mindset. There's always downtime in every day. I mean, people say, "Oh, I need to go to the gym." It's a common thing I hear. And yeah, I mean, you can easily work out and listen to a podcast, watch even some TV in the language if it's going to be on the machine, or you can even probably stream it on some sort of portable device these days. So I don't think there's really any real excuse for not being. No excuse. Well, I guess if you go with that mindset, then you'll always find time, right? If you say there's no excuse, right, I'm gonna do it. So yeah, it's not that hard in reality.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think that if there is a limitation, it's in our mind for sure. But I guess it's just easy to be caught up with this change of mentality. Once you board the plane, it's like you leave a part of your brain behind, and you're like, "Oh, I'm traveling now. I'm not." I can't explain it, but it seems that way sometimes.
I think a lot of people suffer with that approach where they see traveling as purely a recreational exercise that they do a few times a year. And I think if you approach it like that, I want to switch off and change my routine from what I've been doing before, then of course you're going to think, now I don't also do the half an hour of whatever language, like German, because I'm on holidays in Thailand. So I'm not going to do any of that. But if you have languages and travel more integrated into your lifestyle, then it becomes second nature, that you don't see such a clear defining line between the two, right? So when you go on holidays, a lot of time, for me, I'm going to be somewhere where I'm going to speak one of the languages. I'm probably going to meet people. I may go with a friend who speaks another language. I may meet people there who are also traveling, who speak a third or fourth language that I'm learning. So it's not so hard. And I always receive messages on my, Facebook or primarily, or emails in the different languages every day in any case. So where I'm traveling, I probably have to reply to things in 3, 4, 5, 6 different languages as a matter of course. So for me, it's not so daunting to maintain them for that reason.
And that's do you do anything else? When you reach, let's say, 10 languages, obviously there's going to be some forgetting happening at some point, but do you do anything actively to kind of say, okay, I haven't spoken Catalan in a while, let me talk to my Catalan friend, or go to see the news or read a newspaper or something? Or do you have...
Exactly. I mean, I find it hard to maintain one or two of the languages just because I'm not in regular contact with so many friends or colleagues, or for work reasons with the language, or traveling there so often. So for me, Spanish and Dutch are actually not so as easy as the other languages to maintain. So every once in a while I will open up the newspapers from the Netherlands, or from somewhere like Spain, maybe for Spanish, or Argentina, and just take a read through it, maybe watch something online, watch a few YouTube videos. Maybe there's a Spanish YouTube channel that I watch sometimes for a little bit of humor. The video's about 4 minutes long every week. Hola soy Herman is the name of it. So for that I can watch. Maybe once a month, I'm going to look to 3 or 4 of his videos, right? So I'm going to, catch up a little bit more when having the language back in my head.
Right.
So that's basically what I would do. I mean, you could go a little bit further and say, okay, I'm going to organize 1 hour tuition per week in this language just to maintain it, because I don't have the exposure. So I'm actually considering I will do that maybe in Spanish and Dutch in the next month or two, because I don't have so much exposure to those 2 languages at the moment. But that would be another way of approaching it. Online tuition is relatively inexpensive.
Right.
If you go to, there are several different websites, like italki is quite a popular one. And there you can find tutors, and you can schedule the classes whenever suits you. So it's quite convenient. Even if you're traveling, you can sit down in a cafe with Wi-Fi and have your class 1 hour.
Exactly.
Even if you're in Warsaw for the weekend, or Bangkok, or whatever, you can do your Swahili class with a teacher from East Africa. Everything is possible with the internet, right? So these geographical borders don't really exist like they used to, say, 10 years ago.
And do you use a lot of tutors in the kind of, let's say, the baby steps or the early stages of learning a language, or do you use it more for the maintenance side of it?
No, definitely for when I'm learning the language, I try to have a tutor and to at least have 1 hour a week, as long as possible, but of tuition, and that will keep me, consistently making some progress. I'll definitely make some changes to my daily routine, and also include maybe reading something in the language just for a few minutes every day, or if there's some sort of program or language learning app or something I'm using to help me with it, I will do a few minutes of that. Hopefully, just every day, just to do a few minutes.
Right.
And then these things together, combined every day, you don't have to be more than half an hour, 45 minutes, but over a year, if you just have consistency, then that builds up to a reasonable amount of time. And it's always good to have a tutor that suits you, one that you can relate to well. It's that you discuss interesting topics, not just that you're learning the nuts and bolts of the language. I think that's also an important element for learning, because it will help maintain your motivation. If you have someone interesting to discuss different topics in the language as you go along, as you're learning it.
Yeah, and that also makes sense, right? Because if if you are really crazy about Pokemon cards, I don't know why I picked that, but I used to collect that when I was a child. If you're really into that, then obviously you're going to want to talk about that at some point in the real life, right? So if you can talk to your tutor about that and learn the kind of the terminology or the vocabulary for that kind of specialist subject, then I mean that's going to be infinitely more helpful than learning how to, I don't know, buy stocks or something. It's something routinely from a phrase book or something. I mean, most of the phrases you see in the phrase book, how often do you use some of those?
Precisely. I'm always amazed by a lot of different phrase books, as you say, or even different online course or different language courses in general. The vocabulary that they expect me to learn is a lot of the time it's completely irrelevant to anything I want to say or write or even listen to in real life.
Yeah.
So this is, it's a very nice word for me to know, but it's in my life relatively obscure. So if you have a tutor and you can discuss topics that you're really interested in that will mimic and prepare you for real life conversations that you want to have with people who speak the language you're learning, then that's golden. That's so much better than reading a language learning book or some sort of app that's going to expose you to a different type of vocabulary that mightn't be specific to your needs.
Right. Exactly. And some of the most notorious examples I can think of are when they teach you, 5 different types of flowers or fish or something, and obviously these never ever translate well for some reason. It's completely different names across the languages. And it's like, why do I need to know that it's called there's the fish and chip fish, the place. I mean, UK people would know that because you can order plays and chips, right? But when I first arrived in London, and the girl behind the bar said, would you like plays? I was like, what does that sentence even mean? And, that was because, and I consider my English to be, relatively high level. So for me to be stumped by somebody in a pub was kind of not expected, but this vocabulary just wasn't relevant. There was never be a time where it was relevant in Denmark for me to know what this specific type of fish was called. And I don't even know the name in Danish. And that just illustrates the example even more, right?
Yeah, precisely. But this is also something that you will observe as you travel around, that you need different words because you might be in a different culture. Your interests might change because of new countries that you visit and you spend time in, and then you will learn those, and you may actually have difficulty even saying them in your native language afterwards, because you never needed to be able to say that word when you were living, as you said, in Denmark, and then suddenly you're in a pub in England and you realize place is very, very important to know because fish just doesn't do it.
Exactly, yeah. And how do you find your English? Do you use it enough so it never really slips, or have you had like times when you've kind of felt a little bit of a decline due to just speaking in other languages all the time?
I'm often told that I don't sound like I'm a complete native speaker, which is kind of interesting. But it's true that I tend to be a little bit maybe more precise in the words I use, maybe not sound as natural in the flow, because I'm used to on one hand speaking in different languages every day, and then on the other hand I also have to speak a lot in English. Where the person doesn't speak English as their first language. And then I try to speak slower and to articulate my words more.
Of course.
So you kind of slow down your pace and change your intonation quite a bit to make it more understandable. I don't necessarily think it declines in the sense of being an English speaker, but if, for example, there's specialized vocabulary that I'm only using in a foreign language that's a language other than English, then perhaps that's the case, because you just don't use the words on a daily basis like you would if you were only working in English, for example. And then it becomes a little bit harder to maintain it because your specialist knowledge has been spread over 5 or 6 different languages. So maybe they don't come out in English as quickly as they might be if you were just monolingual and using that, all day as your profession. That's what I say. That's where I would see the main difference.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.